A man washed ashore after a grueling, bone-chilling 13-hour swim through unforgiving waters with no ID, a completely erased past, and a fake name. This is a bizarre case of David Henry Law, and it has evolved into one of the most baffling, unsolved internet mysteries of the decade. In September 2024, this man was pulled from the cold waters of Roselle Bay in Jersey. Now, this is the small European island Jersey, not New Jersey. And he was claiming he had just miraculously survived swimming all the way from the coast of France. He had no identification. The only possessions that he had were a swim cap, goggles, and about 265 euros that were sealed inside a waterproof belt bag. When he was brought in for questioning, this unidentified person claimed to be a British citizen named David Henry Law. But when he was asked to prove it, he didn't have a birth certificate or a passport. No, he started quoting Shakespeare to baffled investigators. The police would draw a total blank. Despite running his biometrics through global databases, there were no matching fingerprints, no facial recognition hits, and no records of him existing anywhere in the world. The man had no past. He was a ghost. Now, his existence has created this massive legal loophole. Because his real identity remains a heavily guarded state secret, his deportation has become a legal puzzle. How do you deport a man without a country? Today, we're breaking down the baffling case of the mystery of David Henry Law. Let's get spooky. The case of the man who arrived in the Channel Islands referring to himself as David Henry Law is a unique mystery. We live in an era that's categorized by constant digital surveillance. Our biometrics are tracked everywhere, and there is a paper trail of our every movement. So the appearance of an adult male with no verifiable historical footprint is shocking. On Thursday, September 19th, 2024, the unidentified man was pulled from the waters of Roselle Bay on the north coast of Jersey. He claimed to have spent the previous 13 hours swimming across the channel from the coast of France. From the moment he was pulled onto the beach, he claimed to be a British citizen. And when he was confronted by the fact that he lacked any documentation to prove his British citizenship and that he had a distinct non-British accent, he continued to insist that he was a British citizen. He would be arrested for illegal entry. Then this case would naturally spill over into the internet, creating a significant discourse on Reddit and other internet forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries. By September 2025, which was 1 year after he arrived, the Jersey Customs and Immigration Service announced that they had finally cracked the case and discovered the man's true identity. They confirmed that he was not David Law and he was not a British citizen. However, they claimed because of privacy reasons that they would not release his real name, his age, or his country of origin to the public. To understand how improbable the story of David Law is, you need to look at how our administrative systems function. The modern state relies on a continuous, uninterrupted stream of data to verify your existence. This includes birth certificates, tax records, school enrollments, property taxes, medical histories, and your digital footprint that's generated by your smartphones and your social media. When analyzing this person, his most prominent feature was the lack of any of this data. Before September 19th, 2024, David Henry Law did not exist. During his initial question by customs officers, he would provide a sprawling life history. He claimed that he was born in London, and according to his story, his parents relocated the family when he was a young child, taking him away from the United Kingdom through various countries in South Asia and Southeast Asia. He claimed to have resided in India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar over a continuous period of at least 10 years. He also claimed that he had a British passport in his youth, which is what he used for these travels. And when the authorities said that his accent was not that of a Londoner, he dismissed them. He said quite firmly that English was his first and only language. Moving a British family from India and Bangladesh and Myanmar is not easy. These are countries with paper-heavy bureaucracies. A foreign national residing in these countries for a decade would have a massive paper trail. There would be visa application, residency permits, foreign registration office check-ins. And also, British citizens living abroad are generally known to their local consulates. They renew passports, they register births of their children, and they sometimes need assistance. But there was a complete absence of these records. And that means if his narrative were at least partially true. His movement across these borders was probably undocumented or conducted under a different non-British identity. It's likely that he was actually a native of one of these countries, Myanmar or Bangladesh being the most likely candidates, and that he simply made up the British expatriate story to explain his familiarity with the region, attempting to claim a more advantageous nationality upon his arrival in Europe. He would be taken into custody at the Jersey General Hospital. The standard procedure was that authorities would run his biometrics through all accessible databases, and the results were entirely negative. There were no matches for his DNA. His fingerprints didn't have any matches. And his alias and physical description did not appear on any domestic immigration databases or international watch lists. It's incredibly rare for an adult going through international borders to produce a zero return result across all of the modern biometric systems. It means that he'd never been fingerprinted for a modern biometric visa application to the UK. And it also means he had never been formally processed for asylum upon entering Europe prior to his swim. To go from South Asia to the coastline of France without having his fingerprints logged into a digitized system requires a vast network of smuggling routes or a previous identity that utilized a highly convincing, non-biometric, fraudulent travel document. His digital footprint was barren too. A search for the name David Henry Law, cross-referenced with the background locations of Myanmar, India, and Bangladesh, had absolutely no school records and no social media presence. In an era where individuals generate gigabytes of data passively, maintaining this level of anonymity requires a lifetime spent in environments that are completely disconnected from the internet. The Jersey authorities treated David Law as a fabricated alias from day one, hitting a brick wall in their attempts to trace his movements backward from the shoreline. On that morning of Thursday, September 19th, 2024, emergency services were called to Roselle Bay, which is a small harbor located on the rugged northern coast of Jersey. Two individuals who were on or near the beach heard someone shouting for help from the water. Paramedics arrived on the scene, brought the man ashore, and immediately began treating him. After stabilizing him on the beach, he was transported to Jersey General Hospital for a full medical evaluation. The fact that he was conscious, lucid, and capable of shouting for assistance indicates that while he was probably tired and cold, he had not reached advanced stages of hypothermia or muscular exhaustion that would typically happen before drowning in the open water. He was tired, but he wasn't dying. The contents of his belt bag had 265 euros, which is practical. He was preparing to make landfall in an unknown area. It's enough money to get immediate supplies, food, transportation, clothing, and maybe enough for a place to stay for a few nights. As he was interviewed, he claimed to have swum from an undisclosed beach in France directly to Jersey, and he estimated it took him about 13 hours in the water. Now, 13 hours of swimming is crazy, especially when you look at the English Channel. The closest point of land in France to the island of Jersey is about 14 miles away in a straight line. However, the English Channel has some of the most complex, fast-moving tidal currents in the world. A straight line swim is probably impossible. A swimmer is constantly pushed by the shifting tides, which would usually turn an 14-mile crossing into a massive S-curve route that could exceed 20 to 25 miles of actual swimming distance. On that day, the sea temperature was about 54 degrees Fahrenheit, which is uncomfortably cold swimming weather. Swimming for 13 hours in 54-degree water is extreme. So extreme that the thermal protection of a thick neoprene wetsuit wouldn't do much. This swim would have required elite-level athletic conditioning and training. And his claim that the 13-hour trip roughly aligns with how long it would take an experienced, steady endurance swimmer to cover this distance between France and Jersey. However, he didn't have a support boat, supposedly. So there was no one tossing him food or water every 45 minutes, which is something that is standard protocol for people who swim the channel. A 13-hour unassisted swim is bordering on the absolute limits of human endurance. The fact that he was found alive, fully conscious, and capable of speaking and yelling for help, and that he didn't have any medical trauma is shocking. It's possible that he's an exceptionally well-conditioned endurance athlete with incredible abilities. But the more probable reality is that he actually didn't spend the 13 hours in the water. It's likely that he was transported by a small undocumented vessel or smuggling boat, dropped a few miles off the coast of Jersey in the early morning darkness, and only swam the final leg to the beach at Roselle Bay. Authorities have not confirmed whether they believe his 13-hour swim is true or if they suspect that he was assisted in crossing. After he was discharged from the general hospital and cleared of any life-threatening issues, the man was immediately taken into custody by customs officers. They would interview him, asked for his background, asked about his lack of documentation and his intent. And it was here that some more unusual behavior came out. When he was asked why he chose to undergo this dangerous swim across a major international shipping lane rather than just visiting a British embassy in France to sort out his documentation, he stated that he had a deep distrust of the government and noted that he did not want to use the embassy as a ticket office or charity. He would explain further that he actively preferred to do things the hard way. And that's obvious. And said that swimming the channel was a better, more honest method of travel than dealing with all that bureaucratic red tape. This shows a man with a deep-seated institutional distrust, coupled with this massive inflative ego. It shows that he was aware of his actions and the consequences of them. He wasn't suffering from amnesia, and he wasn't in a disassociative fugue state. And he maintained a consistent story. He never once broke from the David Law persona. He would calmly accept the legal consequences for his border violation. Even though his whole story made no sense, it made perfect sense to him. When custom officers challenged him on his nationality, pointing out that he had no identification and spoke with a non-English accent, he offered to prove how British he was by reciting the works of William Shakespeare. This is an incredible deflection. Quoting Shakespeare is obviously not a recognized legal standard for establishing citizenship in any country on earth, but it shows a kind of romanticized view of what makes up British identity. Unfortunately, we don't know what exactly he quoted. It could have been Macbeth or even The Tempest, which probably would have been apropos. Shakespeare is studied globally, so it's not a very good indicator of being British. It seems like this is someone who was educated in a former British colony. Maybe India or Bangladesh or Myanmar, like he claimed that he lived in. In these areas, there is still an emphasis on classic English literature. And the ability to memorize and recite Shakespeare is still viewed as the pinnacle of English fluency. By offering this as proof, he was utilizing his knowledge, what he knew, to show his culture or the culture that he wanted to be. So authorities had a man who had no documentation, triggered no biometric matches, had an improbable backstory, and wanted to quote poetry. They had a very interesting problem. They had to figure out what to do with a stateless, undocumented migrant who refused to cooperate with identification procedures. In March 2025, which was about 6 months after he first washed ashore, he was brought before the royal court in Jersey. The Jersey Customs and Immigration Service spent the entirety of those 6 months conducting an exhaustive investigation. They worked with international partners, they scoured databases, and it yielded absolutely nothing regarding his true identity or nationality. The court proceedings were swift, as the facts of the case were indisputable, and he was sentenced to 15 months in prison. His charges were pretty straightforward: knowingly entering Jersey without leave. The sentencing judge noted the deception that was used by this man, stating that it was reflected in the severity of the sentence. And the court recommended that he be deported upon the completion of his jail sentence. He would be sent to Her Majesty's Prison in Lemoy to serve out the remainder of his time. His official release date was calculated for exactly 1 year after his arrival, September 2025. At the Lemoy prison, he was generally compliant with the guards and the prison routine, but he continued to maintain his David Law persona. He interacted with everybody under the name David Law. The situation would reach a bottleneck in September 2025. He had completed his 15-month sentence and under normal legal circumstances, a person who served their time would be released back into the public. But the court had established that he had no legal right to live in Jersey, and he still had no established identity or passport. So he couldn't just walk out of the front gates of the prison. So he would be paper transferred. He went from serving a criminal sentence to being held under indefinite immigration detention, remaining in the exact same cell. And this created a catch-22 for the Jersey government. They couldn't grant him asylum or refugee status because he had refused to claim it, insisting that he was already a British citizen. They couldn't give him a work permit or integrate him into the local areas because his nationality was disputed. And they couldn't deport him because you can't deport a man who doesn't have a place to go to. On September 10th, 2025, which was almost exactly a year after he dragged himself onto Roselle Bay, the Jersey Customs and Immigration Service released a formal public statement indicating that they had made a major breakthrough in the case. They stated that their investigation had finally established the true identity of the individual. They confirmed a few negatives to the public. He is definitely not David Henry Law. He is definitely not a British citizen, and he has absolutely no right to reside in Jersey. However, in a move that would only create further speculation, they refused to publicly disclose his actual name, his true age, or his actual country of origin. And they would cite privacy reasons for this decision and state that they would make no further comment on the matter. While authorities remain tight-lipped, the reality is a small island government means that there's invariably leaks. Multiple sources within the administration have leaked some details to the press, saying that the government was trying to secure travel documents from various places, and noted that he was from an at-risk country. Multiple sources have indicated to the media that the individual would eventually be deported to Germany. If we look at these leaks with his earlier claims, if he is from an at-risk country, which implies a country experiencing active war, severe political instability, or systemic human rights abuses, Jersey authorities would be prevented from forcibly returning him to that country. So if he was actually from Myanmar, he would fall under this at-risk category due to the ongoing civil war and military coup in that country. And if Germany is the destination for his deportation, it means that he either has legal residency, refugee status, or some sort of visa in Germany under his true identity, or that Germany was proven to be his last established point of departure before he entered France to make the swim, and the German government has agreed to process his return. It goes without saying, regardless of these agreements that are being made behind the scenes, undocumented deportation is an incredibly slow process. And this story, of course, has blown up online, Reddit, and other niche internet communities that are dedicated to mysteries, John Does, and strange events. The David Law case is discussed, dissected, and categorized among other famous identification stories. The most common comparison drawn by internet sleuths is to the famous case of Peter Bergmann. In the summer of 2009, a man arrived in the coastal town of Sligo, Ireland, operating under the name Peter Bergmann. And over the course of several days, he engaged in a highly methodical process of severing his ties to the world. Eventually, his body would be found washed up on a local beach. And despite years-long, extensive investigations, his true identity is completely unknown to this day. Now, obviously, these are both men who arrived mysteriously in coastal European towns and used fabricated aliases and went to extreme lengths to sever their ties to their past lives. And both have a connection to the ocean. However, Peter Bergmann was a man who wanted to disappear entirely and die without leaving a trace. David Law was a man who wanted to arrive and establish a completely new identity. He didn't want to disappear. He wanted to reboot. I previously had done a video on Peter Bergmann, the Sligo man, and I suggest that you go watch that after you're finished watching this video. When an individual like David Law managed to swim through the multi-billion-dollar net that states carry over their borders with nothing but a wetsuit, 265 euros, and memorized Shakespeare quotes, it gives you a sudden jarring realization that it is still technically possible to step entirely off the grid. All it takes is a willingness to abandon all your property, swim for 13 hours in treacherous water, and sit in a jail for a year or so. And despite the fact that authorities have stated that they now know who exactly he is, refusing to publish his name ensures that his persona and story travels because it's a mystery, an unsolved mystery. The public record of David Law will likely end exactly as abruptly as it began, culminating in a quiet, unpublicized deportation flight in the middle of the night, leaving the actual details of his true origins completely obscured from the public. Please subscribe to this channel, The Spooky Lawyer. Please like and share this video. If you'd like to support the channel, you could become a member of the channel. I appreciate you considering that. You can also support me by continuing to watch, like, comment on, and hype my videos. And I do really appreciate you watching my videos. And please stay spooky.